Hello and welcome to a brand new Ammach program. You're in for an interesting ride. This is the Ammach Files, hosted by peoplesinternetradio.com. Program 33 of the Ammach Files. I don't know if I'm hearing a little bit of reverb back on me, but can everybody hear me all right? And some people will be seeing me, my goodness. Gosh, what a shock. Just had time to run up and put some lippy on. So, it's the Ammach Files, which means it's Tuesday. And it is the 2nd of June. Is that summer? My goodness. Well, if it is, we've had 60 mile an hour or more winds. And excuse me reading, folks, but I'm going to be reading my script here. So maybe that's summer. Maybe that's our lot. The torrent has abated. Gosh, what a relief. Nearly got blown off my porch today. Thank goodness for that. So it's a full moon, and apparently it's in Sagittarius. So it's a time heralding the philosopher and also intuition. So maybe we need to be looking at those answers and finding them within. Now, back to my conference, the Ammach International Experiences Conference. I wasn't sure whether, with the change of date, which is to August the 1st now, which is still a Saturday, at the Bannatyne Spa Hotel in the Hastings area, whether we'd have Steve Colburn, the material scientist, on board doing a live Skype interview with us or presentation, because I couldn't get hold of him for ages. And I know that he's been working with John Hutchison, and of course he spent a few years, for those of you who heard my chat with him before, working with Dr. Roger Lear and looking at implants. And he came on as well, coming out, as it were, as an abductee himself. So it's really exciting. Steve did also say that there might be a possibility, if there was enough interest, that he might make a physical appearance. But we'll see about that. But nevertheless, we will have him live on Skype, and that is wonderful. So now on to my next guest. She has had the most incredible array of events and experiences which honestly defy belief. It's everything from the paranormal you can possibly imagine, right through to ET, black triangles, helicopters, and well, I'm going to let her tell you, but before we do that, before I bring on Donadela Shreve, she's asked me to play a couple of songs from a young man who's really inspired her. And he's got his music out on reverbnation.com, and his name is Mone. I hope I've got that right. It's M-O-N-E, and he's got a gorgeous surname. It's Goodie, G-O-O-D-I-E. And on the Reverb Nation, it's 415 on the end of that Mone Goodie, thereverbnation.com. So we're going to hear Earth Intruders, which Donadela tells me is all about the ET situation and what is going on. So if Vin has got us cued, then we're going to be hearing Earth Intruders, and then we'll be speaking to Donadela Shreve all the way from Philadelphia. Okay. So I'd like to introduce you all to Donadela Shreve. And Donadela has been suffering with Lyme's disease for quite a number of years. And as well as having all the incredible experiences she's had, I just wanted to flag up some of the issues around Lyme's disease and what's going on with it there. So Donadela, yes. Have we got you on board?
Yes.
Hello.
Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if we'd got the sound all right there. So Donadela, welcome to the Ammach Files. It's a great pleasure to have you on, and we've spoken before quite a few times with periods of intervals. So Donna, we said we'd just look at Lyme's disease and how that is, what the cause is, and that you actually believe it's used as a bio weapon, and the fact that when you got Lyme's disease is caused essentially, at least as I understand it, through airborne insects like a tick. In your case, it was a deer tick. And you were only just in the vicinity of Plum Island by about 5 miles. So I think we should just kick off this chat and have a look at what that means and what Plum Island is for those who may not know.
You want me to talk about it?
I do indeed.
I mean, well, there's a book about it that people can get used probably, that's still available, or I don't think it's in print, but I bought it used. Amazon or other book traders will have it.
What is it, Donadela?
It's called Lab 257, which is the name of the lab that's on Plum Island.
Okay.
And that I read, but actually I was interested in the eugenics movement since I was a teenager, so I had books that are very old, and I recognized the man's name, Eric Traub, in there, who was the one who was mainly responsible for running the lab that was supposedly under the guise of the USDA, studying animal diseases, livestock diseases, in case we were attacked by another country and our livestock was infected, or, you know, there was just an outbreak. And most of the employees thought that's what they were doing, but actually it should have been under the Department of Defense, and instead they were creating diseases.
And we'll just say that, Donadela, that Eric Traub was Traub. In fact, sorry, Traub was the right-hand man of Mengele, Hitler's.
Right. Well, that's when I saw his name. I said, wait a minute. So I pulled out this old book, and in there I was reading the beginning of the eugenics movement again because I hadn't read it in years, and it's Rockefeller was the main funder, and it was the like 1902 or something, I believe.
Right, yeah.
And I think Cold Spring Island was where they built their facility or whatever. But anyway, he recruited Eric Traub. He found him in Germany and found out this guy was working on diseases that would kill humans. And so we're talking about low tech, you know, way back then.
Yeah.
By just experimenting by infecting animals and then, you know, trying to get them into vectors, ticks or mosquitoes or something, or somehow to get it into people. And he worked especially only with ticks. So he brought him here with his ticks from Europe. And the ticks had Lyme disease, and I do believe, I don't think that I had read, and now I can't find it anywhere, maybe if you go on a Wayback Machine on the internet or something, that Lyme disease was never endemic in the United States, in North America. But regardless, he worked there until, I don't know, maybe the 50s or 60s or something, but he was mainly running that lab. But originally, he worked for Rockefeller, and then the war broke out, and he was a super Nazi. And the government was so upset about him that the FBI and the CIA, or the FBI then, it would have been only, or maybe it would have been, what would have we had then was, I forget, the OSS they had before the FBI. Anyway, he was investigated because he was such a super Nazi. They were afraid he was like because he was buying this land and setting up all these huge underground tanks and facilities. And so they were very worried about him. But Rockefeller lent him to the Nazis. And the right-hand man with Menengele.
Yeah.
And then after his tour of duty with the Nazis, Rockefeller didn't have to pick up the tab anymore, and the government did, and brought him back under Operation Paperclip and gave him Lab 257 to run on Long Island. So that's how that all started. But the Lyme disease itself is, no one gets just Lyme disease, and it's kind of confusing because the ticks were intentionally infested with, so they'll carry multiple types of diseases, parasites and everything, bacteria.
I know they've done it with mosquitoes as well,
Right,
Donadela.
right. And now it's to the point where, except for the government, but other scientists, the independent researchers, have found that mosquitoes can carry it and other vectors. So it's a vector-borne disease now, and uh, God only knows. But also the other factor is that mycoplasma is now in it, and it wasn't early on. Mycoplasma is a newer thing that's patented by the Army and is used as a bioweapon. And it's one of the first totally man-made organisms. It's not even quite an organism. It's a very strange thing. But there's like no known treatment for it. And there's like many different strains of it, but they believe that is the Gulf War syndrome, or at least a main part of it, because that was in the vaccine that they gave them that was supposed to be to protect them from Lyme disease. And the mycoplasma was in there with that too. And that's another.
So Donadela, so let's just go. So you've been suffering with this for now many years.
Yes.
And
I was bitten. So in other words, I got round 1 was the early Lyme that first came out of, or either intentionally or unintentionally got out of the lab in 76.
Right. So quite a while ago.
Then years later, and I got very sick, and I had to quit hiking and go home, and never knew what I had. And I ate a very healthy diet. I was vegan. Luckily, I think that, and also I don't think then it had as many diseases packed in the tick. And I ate very healthy. So I ate like the perfect diet. Probably that helped me. But my ankle, where it bit me, it destroyed the ankle, and I wound up having to have surgery. And they took tissue samples because they had never seen anything like it, and sent it to the University of Pennsylvania, which has a huge bioweapon lab. A lot of people don't know that. They get a lot of money for that. And they never told me which lab they sent it to, but they said, oh, you have this new disease called Lyme. Were you hiking in Connecticut or anywhere around there? And I said, yes. And they said, well, it's definitely what it is, but there's no known treatment, but you don't have to worry. It's not that bad. And
we'll just say that Lyme is Lyme's disease. The name is after the place called Lyme, which is very near Plum Island, as we said before.
Right. But it's not really. That's what, I mean, to me, that is, you're looking at the demographics and the epidemic where it starts, and that's ground zero. And why does it start next to a lab? I mean, it's a little too coincidental for me. But anyway, I round up in the 80s, or no, it was early 90s, I guess, moving to a place right outside of Center City, Philadelphia, in a big Victorian house with a big yard that adjoined a 1,400-acre park full of deer and everything else, and would garden and get ticks. And I'd take them off and say, no problem. And I really never paid much attention to the Lyme disease issue, and didn't know more about it until I got one bite that was particularly nasty, and I got a solid rash, and I got really sick. So I went to the doctors, brought the tick. She refused to do anything, test me, even give me oral antibiotics, insisted I didn't have it, gave me a runaround until by 14 days I was better way, and then it simmers in your system, and then over time all these things just pop out and it just destroys you. So I went untreated for several years before I finally got diagnosed. And by then, I had the newer, more improved version of Lyme, and I had mycoplasma too.
Okay,
So,
and you were telling me earlier on as well, Donadela, that it's actually illegal. I can't quite get my head around that for GPs or MDs to treat people after they've been through the hoops of some diagnosis after a certain round of antibiotics. Is that correct?
yes.
Wow.
Except they passed laws finally in 3 New England states that they can no longer do that because there's so many people infected. It's like
really
bankrupting the state anyway. So,
wow, gosh. Yeah, we just don't hear just how bad these things are. In talking to Vin, who is producing the show, he was saying that there's a lady who was talking about having had, or she knew someone who'd had Lyme's and who'd cured it with natural processes. So I'll put you in touch with those folks after the show as well to see, let's hope that there is something that can come from that for you.
But the problem is, like, even my doctor knew. He said, if you have mycoplasma, you'll never get rid of that.
Okay. Well, let's see what these other folks have to offer. But listen, let's get on with your story now. I just wanted to sort of set the pace for people, because also, folks, just tonight, bear with us. Donadela really has a struggle sometimes remembering some things, and she's in quite a considerable amount of discomfort and pain. So, if we get a bit slow, whatever, please stay with us, and just bear in mind she's really doing a great job. So I know I said I'd love to just start where I always ask people to start, which is the beginning in their childhood. And you were telling me that you were known as a very precocious child. You had incredible abilities and skills just as a very young toddler. So tell us a little bit about that, because that will just set up for who you are down the line.
Yeah, I was like, I have memories too. Like, I can even remember from being in my crib and looking at patterns on the wallpaper on the ceiling, and like Rorschach, like imagining what they look like, and I can remember things that would freak my mother out, and she'd say, like, well, you were only 14 months old, how could you know that, or I'll look at a photograph and I can tell you what was happening and what day that was and what was going on, and I'm only 2. But by the time I was 2, I could hold a conversation with adults, and I had, full, very full vocabulary, but also, was intelligent and understood. So it's like I was a mini adult. And my mother even said that my family doctor told her, she's a really amazing child, but you have to remember that she's a child, because she like I would get myself dressed and ready and go to school for kindergarten by myself, and she wouldn't have to wake me up. I would get myself up and, comb my hair, pick out my clothes, and get dressed and be ready to go for kindergarten. And
you also said that you were really psychic.
Right. And I was psychic, but I didn't know. In other words, it's like you don't know that other people aren't, or you don't know, you don't have a self-awareness at that age usually. Yeah. And, I played with a few kids, but, it was just like, that's cool, or, oh, you can do that, or, that, but I did things that were different, and I also was interested in things with my body for some reason. I knew yoga somehow, and I would do all types of yoga positions. I like to meditate. I loved my swing in my yard, and I'm talking when I was a toddler. Get on the swing, and there was a tree, so I would go in and out of the shade and the sun, so it'd be a strobe light effect, and I'd lean my head back and swing, close my eyes, and then it would be in the shade, in the light, in the shade, in the light, and that'll put you into a trance. And I love to do that. Now, I don't remember if the trance did anything other than relax me, but that was one of my favorite things. And I did the yoga things. And when I was older, I found out there was yoga and that I knew all these yoga poses because I had been doing them all along. And the other thing I did from when I got a little older was I was interested in pushing my body more towards like it would be martial arts, but only for like tolerance against cold, heat, sleeping on a hard floor.
I mean, it's almost like you were in training for something.
Right. And also, I wanted to train myself to be able to see as far as I could behind me without turning my head, using peripheral vision. So by training my eyeballs and my muscles, like keep trying to watch my fingers every day, I do it, move it, keep moving them back until I could see further and further and further behind me. And also I could sense, like if I'm in a room, a small room, especially the smaller the room, the easier it is, but get the feeling of the whole room and where I am in it. And you could blindfold me and everything, but if somebody just stuck their hand in the door and I couldn't hear it, I would know my space was invaded. I could sense someone was there. But other than that, I mean, I also levitated, but by then I was 5, and I was going to kindergarten, and we lived in a suburb that was a nice little suburb, and it was in the early 60s, I guess. Yeah, that would be.
Yeah. So Donadela, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to not to miss out on the story that you were telling me, which is so fascinating, about the interaction you had with the Native American Indians. And
oh yes, right.
So tell us about that.
Yeah, we had a creek behind my house and woods, and these were real old mill houses that were built during the Revolutionary, before the Revolutionary War, when it was colonial. So we had a colonial home, and they were really cute little mill houses from mill workers. It was no longer there, that the creek was behind my house the mill was on. And my mother would say when I got outside, don't get your shoes muddy and don't go in the creek. So I would go in the yard and play, and there was this big bush. I don't know what it was, maybe what kind of bush it was, but it was a big bush at the end of the yard, and then the driveway, and then the embankment that went down into the creek. So I would play in that bush anyway, because it was kind of like hollow inside, and I'd go in there, and I'd take my shoes off, and I'd wait a little while, and she would think, I guess, I was playing in the bush, and then I would go out the other side and go down into the creek and play. And one of the days when I was playing in the creek, I saw what looked like, I didn't know then because I didn't know what, maybe I doubt I would know, but it was an American Indian, and he came out of the bushes and saw me and beckoned to me like he knew me. And he did, like, he knelt down and he held his arms out like your dad would say, like, hey, like, come run to me, and I just ran to him because he just appealed to me, and he seemed really friendly, and he had his hair, I think, in 1 or 2 braids, I'm not sure. He had braided hair though, and he only had like a loincloth on, I think, and beads or something. I'm not sure how exactly everything he had on, but anyway, I ran to him and he picked me up, and then he like swung me around and around like he was so happy to see me, like I was being reunited or something with someone. And then I could hear these women speaking and laughing, and I looked down, and in the creek were 2 women in a canoe. And one was an old woman and one was a young woman about his age, and they were Native Americans. And he took me down the embankment and handed me to them into the canoe. And right away, they both like fussed over me, like my hair and, everything. And it was like they were so happy to see me. And then I became friends with them, and I would see them quite often. And I would always do the sneak out of the bush, go down to the creek and play with the Indians, and never told anybody. And they would teach me about nature. Everything has spirit, the rocks, the water, and about animals and how to communicate with animals. And it was telepathically. And like they brought me to a nest of newly hatched wild ducks. And they showed me how to approach the mother duck and she let me actually handle the babies. And it was really neat, because you're a little kid and you get to hold little baby chicks, and it was just so awesome. And then they showed me an area where they had gathered clay in the creek bank, and on the other side it was a real steep embankment, and it's like a wall almost, and there's like seams of clay in there, and it's very high quality clay, and had very few impurities in it, so you could just like take that out, and it was like modeling clay, like you would buy it in the store. And they told me that they made bowls, and they would show me like containers and bowls and things, but they told me they had to fire them, but they couldn't do that with me. But they said I could dry it in the sun, so I used to always make these things with the clay. And then they told me that like there was medicine, that plants had medicine and plants were food, but plants had feelings too, and everything had feelings, and was alive, everything, even the rocks.
Sorry to interrupt, Donadela, I think it would be really nice just to tell them about your birthmark too, because that had a bearing on your interaction with them.
Yes, I had a birthmark on my right arm and right on the top on my shoulder, and it's an exact size and shape of a flint-napped arrowhead, and it's they noticed it right away when they first saw me. And one day when I saw them, they gave me an arrowhead, and they held it up on top of my arrowhead and then gave it to me. And so I skipped away with the arrowhead in my hand when they left, and one of my neighbors that I used to visit all my neighbors, and they were neat. And one of them, I didn't know she was Native American. My mother told me they were Italians. Her husband was Italian. She was a Native American. And she had an herb garden, and she actually grew some native plants. Like she had ground cherries, which are sort of like tomatillos or Chinese lanterns. I don't know in England if you know what those things are, but anyway.
Not personally, but who knows?
They're like bright orange when they're ripe, and it looks like it's papery, and then you open it.
Oh, okay. I think
there's like a little cherry tomato in there.
Oh, yeah.
But they're real pretty, and they're ornamental too. So I was always fascinated by them in her garden. So she was a really nice lady. So I came into her garden, and I was just going to stop and see her garden, and she came out to see me, and I showed her the arrowhead, and she was like, "Wow, where did you get that?" And I said, "The people gave it to me." And she said, "What people?" And then I told her about the people in the canoe, and she right away understood what was going on and said, "Don't tell anybody that. They won't understand. That's our secret, okay? You can tell me, though." And then she came and brought me out her box, and she had a collection of arrowheads. And it was this beautiful box that she had decorated herself, maybe like a wooden cigar box. And inside it was lined with velvet, and she had all these arrowheads. And it seemed like mine belonged in there, because there was like one spot there needed one. So I put it in and I gave it to her. And she said, "Are you sure you want me to have it?" And I said, "Sure." And I gave it to her, and she hugged me and said, "Thank you so much." And she said it took her years and years, like her whole lifetime, to get them. Of like when she was gardening, occasionally she'd find one, And
okay, but the thing about that experience was that in hindsight, you're not sure if they were real 3D people or other dimensional.
Right. Well, the other thing that's true, and I didn't mention that, is that sometimes they were not there, but I knew they were there, and I would speak to them, and I could hear them. In other words, we were speaking telepathically. So I would play with them in the creek, and I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there. So they would telepathically speak to me.
Okay.
So I would have
Amazing.
telepathic conversations with them. So sometimes they'd be there, but they were dimensional and they could pick me up and things. So it's, it's like they weren't just a vision either. So it's very strange.
And did they have anything to do, or was this an innate faculty that you were born with, of this sense of direction? Now, I'm very interested in this because I have a rubbish sense of direction. I'll get lost in my own room, good grief. But you, tell me about that, because it is fascinating.
Yeah, I never understood that people can get lost, and no one ever told me. And my mother would let me, because our neighborhood, even when I was a kid, was like it was such an innocent place. You didn't lock your door at night. You didn't lock your car. There was nobody who was going to kidnap your kid, none of that stuff. And I was allowed to, wander the neighborhood. And as I got older, I would go further and further, and my mother just never really cared where I went, as long as I didn't give her any trouble. And as I got older, we used to go up to the mountains with my cousins, and Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania was pretty undeveloped then. So you could have an entire mountain with maybe 2 cabins somebody owned some land on or something, and nothing else, and some deer trails or a hiking trail, some hunters, but very little anything, road or anything, or a dirt road. And I would just go off with my cousin, and we would just go through the woods, and sometimes we'd take a trail, or we'd then take off a trail and just wander, and I could find water easily. So eventually we'd find like a little pond or something, and then we'd like to catch frogs and toads and things and play around in the pond. And then we go wander off to somewhere else and wander over another mountain. We'd play all day, and we didn't even eat lunch, and we'd come back by dinner. And we would come back a whole different direction, and never occurred to me that you could get lost. And one time we went to a Girl Scout camp, and we thought it would be funny to steal the sign. So my cousin climbed up on their tree, because it was this little tiny sign. It was, somebody hand painted, and she whacked it off, and we brought it back with us. And her father freaked out and said, "How could you have possibly gone that far? How did you get there?" And we said, "We hiked there, And he said, "Well, how did you, you didn't even get lost either. You could have gotten lost." And we got hollered at, and we got in trouble. And that's when they realized how far we were going, and why didn't we get lost. And my cousin was fine with it, because she realized we never got lost, so we just always did it and just didn't tell our parents anymore where the heck we were going, and we weren't staying on trails. But I could just do that for the rest of my life, and even as an adult I could, until I got Lyme disease. But the only thing that is strange that I told Joanne is that what would happen to me when I was older was, all of a sudden, in a blink, my sense of direction would be completely reversed. It would be, everything was right, except it was the opposite, like mirror. North was south, and east was west. And I can't explain the feeling of it, because it's like I would be in the tube or the subway, and you would come up on the street, and you would know going south right in front of you would be City Hall, a huge building. And instead, it was the other direction. And then you would realize your sense of direction was backwards. And it would take me a couple hours to get it, myself reacclimated again, because it had reversed. It's like my polarity reversed. I don't know what causes that, how that would happen. It would happen infrequently throughout my life. Although with one person, it seemed to happen a lot more often that I was with later when I was older, when I would be with him for some reason.
Yeah. I mean, that is just really fascinating stuff, because honestly, I would love to have a sense of direction. I just wasn't born with that chip. God damn, what a nuisance it is too. So time consuming.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I could even, I never drove, and like when I was older, I was a florist, and we do huge parties that would be out of the city in the suburbs in a very wealthy area we have called the Main Line, which is the blue bloods, some of the original money families actually were in Pennsylvania and on the Main Line. And there are some huge estates out there. And at night, too, you can't see driving the roads. There's no signs. They don't want you to find their houses out there. They're in the woods, and they own tons of land. But I could get my boss there, and we could get back because of my sense of direction. It was like, just tell me where to go, and I tell her where to go, and I'd check on a map to get there, and then coming back, we didn't even need to use the map. I could just tell which way to get back. And if traffic was bad and we had a detour, I know how to find our way back anyway.
Yeah, that's great. That's just wonderful. And yeah, I could graft a bit of that DNA, I must say. That'd be great.
If that's what it is, I don't know.
Yeah. Listen, tell us about, I know that you had some experiences, just going back to the ET thing now, which we haven't really started on them proper, but talking about the Greys. Now, you've had quite a bit of experiences with Greys, and there was a being that was slightly mechanical and black. What was that? I just haven't got the timing of that. What age were you?
Okay. I was about 2, I'd say. And I got 2 kittens. And one night I snuck out of bed to give him a plate of milk. And I snuck downstairs into the kitchen. And when I went to go towards the refrigerator, this gigantic black being came out, and it either materialized, or I couldn't have fit behind the refrigerator, but it seemed like it came out from behind the refrigerator, or it materialized that way somehow. But I'd say maybe 6 feet, because it was bigger than the refrigerator, like by about a foot. And it was all black, and it made this humming sound, and it was metallic, and it wasn't real like robotic looking, like it had, like typical robot arm, hinges or any, and I mean, the only robot I would think of then would be probably seeing The Wizard of Oz and the Tin Man, I mean, like that would be a robot, and he didn't look anything like that. The only thing that you could say that he would look like would be maybe Darth Vader now, but we're talking 1960, so I wouldn't know Darth Vader, would I? But it was either there was a human in there or it was robotic, but I thought it was alive and it was a being, but it still had something, and also associated it with electric for some reason, and it hummed, and it had red glowing eyes, and it terrified the crap out of me. And all I can remember was screaming and running away, and I don't remember what happened after that.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know.
And was this around the time when you were also having visitations from little Greys who would come and see you in your room? Okay.
Yes, and my other one brother also had nosebleeds, and they'd come in the room, and I didn't at first know when they come in the room, but what they do is stick their face in your face, and you'd sense someone there, and it'd wake you up, and you'd see just their face in your face, and it's very scary. If anybody does that to you, it would scare you anyway. Even a human does that, it scares you. But this non-human face with these big black weird eyes and this monster face, so I thought it was like a monster, and or a boogeyman, or like, but it wasn't a dream because it woke me up and it's in my room, so then I like scream and then it like knocks you out, so you don't remember anything after that. And then you wake up and there's blood all over, caked in your nose, and it hurts really bad too. Very painful. Your nose, caked up blood, and blood all over your pillow, because your nose had been bleeding. And
Yeah.
then you remember that the night before, that thing stuck its face in your face and knocked you out because you were awake because it woke you up. And my brother also had nosebleeds, although I didn't say to him, like, did you see boogeyman? And then I didn't do that. I didn't associate, I don't know why. But I know my brother also did get nosebleeds. But, so he may have been abducted too because of that. He
And
didn't
do you have
say,
any other memory apart from that, the grey visiting you at your bedside? Did you have
oh,
any memory of
multiple
ships
times.
or?
Multiple
Sorry.
times they had come to my bedside, but it's
Mm,
always they would stick their face in my face, and that's when
yeah.
I sensed them. Although later on, I would sometimes wake up and sense they were in the room already in the dark, and I'd be really scared. And then all of a sudden, they'd stick their face in my face, like I'd wake up a little more ahead because I could
Yeah.
sense them. And then they stick their face in my face, and then they like knock you out and take control of you so that you don't have any memory of what's going on. And then you wake up in the morning and it's like, oh, those monsters were there. And I tell my mother, and she'd say, there's no boogeyman, of course. And then the only other one was the reptilian.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I thought you mentioned that. So again, was this around the same era? And we're talking about you
Yes,
still being a little
yes.
child here,
Still
aren't
only
we?
only a toddler, 2 to 4.
Oh,
And
right.
I was going up the stairs, and this is a really old house, so we didn't have radiators, and they put a furnace in. I guess there were fireplaces still originally too, but they put a furnace in the basement, and they had heat registers that would just blow out, but it wasn't like modern heat vent systems. These are like big 3 by 4 size vents with cast iron covers that were pretty, with like leaves, like Victorian, like probably during Victorian time they had installed it. So it was like a big vent thing with this grate over it with cast iron with, like, say, a leaf pattern, and the air would come through, the hot air, to then heat, come out through the hallway to heat that floor. And I'm coming up the stairs, and it's daytime. It wasn't nighttime. And when I got to the top of the steps, this thing jumped up and grabbed onto the grate, and its fingers were like sticking through, and it was so agile. It was like a monkey. And it stuck its face at the grate, and it was dark, so I couldn't see its whole body, but its face and its fingers, was like right at the grate, and it was looking at me, and it was, to me, like an alligator or a lizard or a reptile of some sort, but it could move like a monkey. It was so agile, and it scared the living daylights out of me, but I was mesmerized and I couldn't move. I stared at it, and it looked at me with one eye and it had a slit pupil. And then it hissed, and it made this really scary, loud hissing sound. And then I screamed and I ran downstairs because the house is built in hills. So the second floor is the living room and the dining room, and the basement is the kitchen, and there was a porch back there, and then there's like the furnace room in the back and the storage area and all. It's a very old house. So I ran all the way down into the kitchen to tell my mom that there was some kind of monster alligator thing in our heat grate. So she went up with me to reassure me that there weren't alligators in heating grates. And of course, there was nothing there then.
Yeah, my goodness. So tell us a little bit about, so I don't know, there doesn't seem to be, this seems to be a lot of different
Well,
sort of
I
events coming in and
levitated
out.
when I was 5.
What were the conditions of that? What were the circumstances around that
I was
happening?
coming home from school, and because the neighborhood was such a nice neighborhood, like I didn't even have to really stay with my brothers, or they were younger. They weren't going to school with me then. I was by myself. I was going to kindergarten, and I would be with other kindergartners. But I just would sometimes skip ahead or run along because I see something or wander off on my own. I just walked home. And it was only about 3 blocks anyway. But it wasn't raining, but in the morning it was. So I had an umbrella, but it wasn't raining then. But all of a sudden it came to my mind, Mary Poppins could fly with an umbrella. So I said, "Oh, I'm going to do that." So I opened up the umbrella and I said, "Okay, I'm going to fly with the umbrella." And I flew. And I flew down the street and I could control it, and I could make myself just go down the street. And I was like about, I'd say 3, 4 feet off the sidewalk, floating down the street with the umbrella. Now, the umbrella was a little kid's umbrella, and if it was really holding me up, it would have probably turned inside out and I would have fallen down. So I was just levitating. And so I'm floating down the street, and all of a sudden I realize all the cars, all the traffic has stopped. And I looked, and in one car right next to me, the woman on the passenger side, the look on her face it was such horror. It was like she was horrified by what she was seeing. And I thought it was wonderful. And I thought that, the people would be all smiling and laughing or something. And because the woman looked so horrified and terrified by what was going on, I immediately stopped levitating, fell to the ground, came to the ground. And then I ran away too, because I thought I did something awful, It's like, what did I do wrong? Like,
Yeah.
I thought it was really cool and people would think that was neat, But I was only 5, so.
Yeah.
And then I did it when I was older, around 10. That was one other time that I did it.
And again, the 10-year-old occasion, what was the circumstances around that? Is that just you willing yourself
No,
to do
it
it?
was girls I went to school with. They had one of them, it was her birthday. She had a birthday party. And in her house, we had cake and all that. And then we went into the park to play afterwards. And they brought a blanket, and, we sat on a blanket because her house was next door to a park that was actually the same one that I lived on further down along the creek. And so we were sitting there, and they were playing games that kids play. And then they came up with this game, and I never heard of it before, but it was this game where you could try to levitate somebody. And we did a couple girls. And what you did was you'd put your index fingers only, each person, and there were only, like, say, 6 girls and maybe one more, 7. So 6 girls would put their index fingers under the 7th person laying on the blanket. And then they would repeat over and over, "She's dead, she's gone, she's dead, she's gone." I think that's what they said, something like that, strange. And then try to lift her up with just their index fingers, and nothing would happen. So, they tried it several times and nothing happened. And what was supposed to happen would be the person would float. So I said, well, I can do that. So then I laid on the blanket and they did it, and I floated. Well, when I floated up, and when I floated up to about their heads, and they freaked out and screamed and ran away. And it felt so nice, I just still laid there floating. And they weren't holding me with fingers or anything, and they couldn't anyway with their index fingers. But I just laid there floating in the air. And I said, I don't care if they ran away. This is really cool. I'm floating. And I'm laying on my back and I'm floating. And then all of a sudden these 2 guys came riding up on horses. And this is in the middle of the city in a park that nobody would have horses. There's nowhere there would be a farm any near. you'd have to drive in with horses in a trailer to get them there, to ride them in this little park. And why would you do such a thing in this dinky park? But these two guys came riding up, and it's symbolic too, a white horse and a black horse. And the guy on the white horse was tall with long blonde hair, and the guy on the black horse was small with long black hair. And he was medium brown skinned, I'd say. And they came racing up to me, and that's when I'm still floating, and I looked at them, and then I flipped down and stood up. And they said, "We saw you from way back there, and how did you do that?" And I said, "What?" And they said, how do you levitate?" And I said, "I just did it." I said, "We were playing a game and nobody could do it." And I said I could do it, and I just did it. And they said, "Well, how do you do it?" And I said, "I just thought I could do it, and I made myself do it. I don't know. I just did it." And then they said, they introduced themselves, and I can't remember the one's name ever again, but the younger one, the black, he was younger and smaller anyway. On the black horse, his name was Matt. But they said, they talked to me for a little while, and then they left. And they said, "We'll see you again sometime." And I just thought the whole thing was very strange. And then the girls came running back because they were afraid of the guys, too, on the horses. The girls were afraid of them, too. And when they came back, they said, "Why did you talk to those guys? They're strangers in the park, and you don't talk to strangers, and they're grown-ups, and blah, 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 blah." I was like, well, they were already there when I was there, and they were very nice. They didn't do anything, and they left. But, I was only like 10, so you didn't think about it, like, logically, like, why in the heck would horses be in a park? And then about 3 years later, I was at summer camp, and they took us on a day trip to a state park where there was a lake, and we were swimming, and then we were sunning ourselves on a hillside. And all of a sudden it popped in my head to tell them the story about how I levitated and these two guys on the horses. And while I was telling the story, the girls screamed, and I said, "What's the matter?" And they go, "Is that the guys?" And it was them.
All right.
It was Matt and the other guy. And they saw me, and they waved, and they came over. And I said, "Oh my God, I was just talking about you." And they said, "Yeah, we know." And they said, "We knew you were here, and we came to see you." And I said, "Oh." And then they were all freaked out. The girls were really freaked out. So then we went to go swim in the water, and they had a fake snake that looked so real and freaked out the girls, and they all ran out. But I wasn't afraid of snakes. And at first I didn't know if it was real or not, but I grabbed it, and it wasn't real. And then they were like, "Oh, wow, you're not afraid of snakes, and you grabbed it, and they were laughing. And then I was like hitting them with it and yelling, and we were playing around, acting all wild, and, horse playing, And then they left, and we left, But it was very strange that how I mention them and they show up, but that's how all my life things like that happen. When I talk about people, they show up and things, and especially weird people.
Well, listen, Donadela, I think we're just going to give you a little break, and let's come back and talk about the just look at my notes, the blue monk on the war issue there, and we've got loads to talk about afterwards. I don't know how we're going to fit it all in, but let's listen to Moan Goodies, and he.
Yeah, you played Frequency the first.
Oh, did we? Oh, Vin. So that was. I thought that was Earth Intruders. It sounded like Earth Intruders with the lyrics.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right. No, you'll hear it when you play, and the other one.
Oh, of course, it kept saying Frequency. Anyway, it's a brilliant song. Okay. Oh well.
No, Earth Intruders is really weird, and it's cool too.
All right, let's listen to the
lyrics. If you listen to the lyrics carefully.
Okay. All right. Well, Moan Goody, yet again, thank you very much. And okay, this is Earth Intruders. I think it's right this time. Tell us. I know I mentioned about the dreams to do with the blue monk, but I also want to try and get in the fact that you also started being trailed when you were really quite young, and it sort of seemed to continue throughout your life, being observed, watched, followed.
Yes.
And also to say that in life you became quite an activist, an environmentalist, and that through the teaching of the Indians, whether they were corporeal or not, I'm not sure, but it doesn't really matter. But you told me one time a gorgeous story of how you could walk into the woods and you could call to the animals and the birds, and really it's a bit of a St. Francis of Assisi moment. They'd just come to you.
Yes, if I go alone.
I mean, how beautiful.
And if I go alone in the woods, well, actually, I had a counselor camp who had this ability too, and nobody wanted to take nature hikes, and I was the only one. And she was born without arms. She was a DES baby or whatever caused that. And she had artificial arms, and she was a beautiful woman. And she taught me how to call animals psychically, like the Indians. And it was like I was picking up from where we left off almost, you know, like where it was a span of 5 years or so that I had, you know, or 10 years, I was 10, so maybe about 6 years since, you know, the Indians. And then here's this woman that says, let's go in the woods. What do you want to see? And I'd say, a fox. And she says, okay, well, let's go over here. We're going to sit on a log. Now think about the fox. Just think about the fox. See him in your mind. Think about the fox and see him in your mind. And the fox comes. And she says, now just sit very still and talk to him with your mind, but don't talk to him with your mouth. Just talk to him with your mind. And then it came back to me, you know, how the Indians had taught me. And the fox would just come right up and sniff us. And she said, don't pet him and, you know, don't grab him or anything, but just let him come around us, you know. And then he, like, would even walk with us. When we walked, because I had to get up and walk away, he, like, walked with us for a little while. Like, he wasn't afraid of us at all then. And then she took me in, like, to a cornfield one time, and she said, what do you want, butterflies? And I said, yeah. And she says, okay, let's think of butterflies, and stick your arms out and look up into the sky and close your eyes and look at the sun through your eyes and just imagine 1,000,000 butterflies. And we just got covered in butterflies. And everything, anything you wanted, you could get if you think about it, and they'd follow. And even now, birds will sometimes not be afraid of me, and sometimes I think they're injured because they just stop and won't, and they look at me. Birds will look at you sideways because they can't see straight on. So if birds really making contact with you, eye contact, they will turn sideways and look with one eye. And it's kind of through the eye, too, that you're speaking telepathically. Usually you use eye contact with an animal. And with a bird, I would see a bird. Like one time I saw a robin, even when I was an adult, in Center City, and he was hopping along, and then he just stopped, and I thought, well, maybe he's injured because he's not flying. And I went over and picked him up, and a man was standing there, and he said, what's wrong with him? And I said, I don't know. And I started to, you know, check his wings and checked his, you know, all of his joints, and he just sat real still in my hands and let me do all that. And I held him, and I said, nothing's wrong with him. Well, maybe he got stunned or something. And I said, oh, I know, sometimes birds just let me pick them up. And the guy looked at me like I was a little bit kooky. And then I said, no, seriously. And then I held him for a little while, and then I put him down, and he didn't go away. He stayed with me. And then he jumped up on my shoulder, and he said, is that your bird? Like he thought it was my pet or something. But that's what will happen. Or like I hang clothes, and chickadees will let me pick them up. Like they'll sit on the clothesline and chirp at me, and then I can like pick them up and hold them. You know, and my daughter wanted to do it, and they wouldn't let her do it, and she would get very frustrated because I could do it and she couldn't, and I couldn't teach her how to do it. So she was always very jealous that I could, but she could go with me in the woods, and deer would walk with us, like a whole group of deer, like a herd of deer. Would follow us like dogs along the trail. But if people came along, then they'd run away.
Yeah. Okay, well, listen, let's get back to then some of the ET events, because I'm just looking at some notes, and we've mentioned, the one I'm thinking of is where you were with your boss. Now, I know we haven't set the scene for what that is, but I think that is just an amazing story. So walk us through that abduction scenario. So
well, I had, never had normal cycles, and I had problems from the very beginning with that I could go 3 months at a time, and I'd have to go to gynecologists all the time, and they'd say, you're pregnant. And I'd say, that's not possible. I wasn't even with anybody, and then they'd say, well, we're going to take a blood test, and it's human chorionic gonadotropin. So that would be negative, but maybe if it wasn't human or half human, it would be negative. I don't know. But, my breasts would swell, everything, and have all the symptoms of pregnancy. I'd even have morning sickness sometimes. And then after 3 months, usually, then I would extremely heavy bleeding. And, that would last for like a week to 10 days. So that was for my entire life from 13 until I had my daughter. So that was a lot.
Yeah, it's very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, and so I suspected, because then I did know a little bit, but I was so afraid of this stuff that I never talked about it to anyone, not because I thought people would think I was crazy, as much as it scared me so much that I didn't want to know anymore. And I didn't, and then at that point I knew there were books or movies or something maybe you could get, but I would avoid it at all costs because I didn't want to scare myself into knowing. I didn't want to know, you know what I mean? It was like, box that out of your mind. So, I was at my boss's house and sleeping on her couch, and we were going to have a wedding, I think, the next day, and that's why I had to be there early. So I was at her house because we were nearer there. And during the night, I knew they came, and I knew they took me. And I said, "Oh Christ!" And I'm at my. And the thing is, sometimes when I was older, when they take me, I am aware, but I cannot do anything about it. I can't speak, I can't move, I can't see, I can't do anything, but I am aware. So you can only feel what's going on, like if they're moving you or, but you can't do anything else. So at that point, I did know they were taking me. I knew I was being moved and everything, and I knew I was being abducted. I was like, oh my God, what, is happening, and why at my boss's, And then the strangest thing was that I broke through, and sometimes I could break through, because when these were happening more and more, I would try to break through, and sometimes I could just get a glimpse a little bit and then they'd knock me out again, so I couldn't see. Well, this time I got to see, and it was a gray, but it was a little larger than normal, like maybe 4 feet tall, 5 feet even, but she was sitting. And I thought it was a woman, but it didn't look any different, but it seemed like it was a female. I don't know if that meant nothing to me, but for some reason it was a female. It had no clothes on or anything that I saw, but it didn't look any different, but it was female to me. But anyway, it was trying to open my cervix with some tool, and it hurt like hell because there's no anesthesia. That hurts. And I was like, ow, and I was trying to scream, but I was telepathically screaming at her. And then she said, we have to go through this. We go through this all the time. And she knocked me out. And then the next thing was I was allowed to see, and I was in a room, and it was this big room, and it was just like opalescent, and there was no walls. It was kind of like, was it a room? But there was a floor. But it was big, and it was just all these like toddlers and babies that were deformed. And they handed me one, and I was like repulsed. Like, I don't want this. And it wasn't human. In other words, like I could handle a human being child that was deformed and not say, ew, repulsive. But this was like, it wasn't human to me, and it was repulsive to me too, and I didn't want to hold it, and I handed it back to her, and that woke me up, or that was the last that I could remember, because it was too frightening or whatever, and it knocked that was all of my memory.
I mean, you said there were a lot of these children. Were they all ranging from, were they all babies, or were they some of them
No,
babies?
there were toddlers,
some toddlers. Okay, I didn't quite catch that.
Babies too, yeah.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of them.
So, and when you said they were, I think you said in our chat before that they were they looked horribly deformed. I mean, did they look like they were disabled?
No, I would say no, they're hybrids, but then no, for sure. And also I think I did associate that they were probably hybrids, and that freaked me out so much that they did that, and that could possibly be true. And if that was half mine, and it was such a horrific thing they did genetically, that it was horrific, that's what it was that was so repulsive. It was.
And have you had any other encounters with any of the genetic offspring?
No.
No.
But then in the morning, I woke up and my boss came downstairs waking me up, telling me, I just had the weirdest dream. Oh my God, I had the weirdest dream. And I said, what? And she said, I was in this room with you, and it was this place, and it was really weird, but there was like dozens and dozens and dozens of all these deformed babies and toddlers, and they were all yours. And I said, oh my God, she was with me, like I said to her, oh, that's disgusting. And I pretended like I knew nothing about it, of course. And I said, well, what did they look like? Plus I wanted to see maybe if she saw more, but she didn't see any more. But she said she saw me holding one.
Oh, right. So what would you say these looked like? Did they all have the same look about them, or were they all very different?
No, they did. They had the same sort of look, like humanoidish, but like their heads were too big, and they were bald, and they were like sickly kind of looking, like too malnourished, or like skinny, scrawny, like.
Did the baby or the child interact with you when you were holding it? Did you notice?
As soon as she gave it to me, I wanted to throw it. I mean, it was like, it was just too upsetting, or I can't even put it into.
Did the child make any attempt at recognition of you? I mean, make an attempt, that's not the right word, but
I didn't even give it enough time to even do it.
Okay.
It was like as soon as she even tried to put it in my arms, I didn't even, when I saw it coming at me, I was like, don't even give me that thing. And then when she put it in my arms, I'd immediately threw it back at her, like, I don't want that thing. And then I just looked around, and it was like, oh my God. And then it was like, it dawned on me, I think, that are these all mine, and how many are there? And then after that, that's when I started to think, are they doing that? And is that what they are doing? And how many are there? And why are they doing that? And do they all look like that? And how are they growing up? And could I even love them? Or, and do I have feelings for them? And I just had to block it out of my mind because it was too horrific to me.
So you had no other interaction then with any of the children, the hybrid
not
children?
Not that I recall. I mean, they couldn't
as far as you know.
Memories out, because I still would have abduction things, so I don't know what they did, because I would never have memories, except maybe when they come or when they drop me off, So whatever happened during, I don't remember.
Donadela, I've got a picture up on the podcast of an image you sent of your foot. I think it's your right foot, actually. I'm just trying to remember now. With this really bad bruising.
Yeah, I can't see.
Can you, no, you won't be able to see it, but it's
Yeah.
the picture that you sent me of that. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? So when people go there and have a look for the
Okay.
podcast.
You want to put that up? My ugly toenails. That's the Lyme disease, actually. I my dog kept signaling to me. Well, first of all, this is even before that. I was in the living room and I saw a man out of the corner of my eyes running up the steps onto my porch. This was about 4 years ago now, or 3 years ago. And he looked like he was from the 1930s maybe, and he had on a trench coat and hat, and he was running up the steps, but it was like in the wrong motion, like a 35 millimeter film on jerky, you know,
Yeah.
but it's the corner of my eye, but I definitely saw him go by. So I jumped up to look, and there was nobody there. And then after that, my dog kept signaling to me, especially at night, when we come out. My front porch, there's a big Victorian house, you could go to the left, there were steps down to the driveway if you wanted to go to the car, or straight ahead steps down, and then a sidewalk that went out to the street, you know. And the one I would go would be the sidewalk out to the street. And we had a huge lilac bush and a butterfly bush there. And she would keep signaling to me that someone was there. She could see something, and her hair would actually stand up. And she was so horrified, she would sit and refuse to budge, would not go down the steps, would not go that way off the porch. And I would, you know, go, what's the matter? Nothing's there, you know? And it would freak me out, but, you know, and sometimes I'd force her. And one time she actually pulled herself out of her harness, and, you know, but nothing happened. And then one time she signaled again, and this time, the next thing I knew, I was falling out of the sky, and I was about at least 10 feet falling down when I realized I was falling out of the sky, and I could see my dog laying on her side on the sidewalk, and it was nighttime, and I came down with my foot straight down, my one foot, and my other foot was sort of like up and behind me, I guess. And the way I landed was like a ballerina pose, but my one right foot my toes were pointed straight down, hit the sidewalk, and folded under the whole weight of all my body, and then torqued my other leg around under me, so I had a really bad injury to my tendons in my knee there. And I had to go to the emergency room for that.
I mean, do you have any memory at all, Donadela, of what that incident was?
No, all I know is 1 minute, but I told you the dog kept signaling to me.
Yeah.
And I had seen that man twice, actually, too, several months apart. It was the same guy, did the same action, ran onto the porch. And I don't know if it has anything to do with that.
Yeah. It's just bizarre. Absolutely.
It might
bizarre.
be, you know, a past thing that I just saw an echo of or something. But anyway, the bruise showed up across my toes like that in the picture. And when I went to the ER, the guy said to me, you couldn't have fallen off the porch if there were 3 steps and you fell down the steps. And did you catch your foot in like the step and bend your toes in there? Or he said, normally when you fall forward, you put your hands down and you would have like a wrist injury, or you would fall sideways. He's arguing over, I didn't fall over the porch. And I didn't want to say I fell out of the sky, but he was like, oh, well, I just scratched his head. But they x-rayed my foot and my knee. And luckily, nothing was broken except a small bone in my foot that he said that they just put a boot on to keep it immobilized so it would heal. And then I had to wear a brace on my knee. And I took a picture of it, but
and did that heal pretty quickly, or how was that?
No, it didn't. It didn't heal quick.
Okay.
And my toes hurt
That's
really
weird.
bad. You couldn't even touch them. But then I was watching one of your videos one night, and on the side on YouTube, sometimes they show you, you know, suggest something else. And I said, normally I don't pay attention to those things. For some reason, caught my eye, and it says something dumb like abduction in Canada. Like, boy, I would really go for that one. And I don't normally want to look at these things and get myself upset. So, but for some reason, I'm drawn to it. So I turn it on, I watch it, and it's like this stupid, typical abduction scenario of a woman in her car at night driving alone down a dark road in the countryside, and the craft comes in the light, and she gets picked up, and the normal, typical story. And but then they showed two pictures, and my jaw dropped. One was there was a red mark over a breast. The other thing was identical to my right foot. It looked like my picture was on the screen. And I said, oh my God, that's like my foot. Like, why? I don't know. And why was I drawn to see the video? And why did she have that injury from being abducted? And I don't know. That's just a coincidence or nothing. It has nothing to do with it, but it was strange.
Yeah, absolutely.
About a year later, one morning, I woke up and the bruise was there again. And I didn't do anything during the night that I knew of, and it was dark, and I took a picture of it, and it wasn't quite as dark as before, but it was still the same bruise. And actually, the light wasn't good in that photo, but I was actually going to see my doctor that day. So when I went to the doctor's, I took my shoe off and I said, look at this. And he said, oh my God. And he said, what did you do to your foot? And I said, I don't know. And he said, can I bend your toes? I want to make sure they're not broken. And it hurt really bad too. And he said, no, your toes aren't broken. You're lucky. What did you do? And I said, I don't know.
Yeah, strange. So listen, let's, I know we are I'm trying to cover quite a few things. I'd really like for folks to hear about this, the monk, the blue monk, and that war issue. Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, like you told me, people followed me. I had all these things too, and I was always trailed by strange people. I was abducted by people or kidnapped by people who were into black magic, but they also did have actual powers, like they could appear and disappear and do things like that. They could actually make me do things against my will, all kind of weird things. If you don't want to get into that, but they made me read a book that was the Egyptian Book of Dead. They put me in a house by myself, left me for hours, and came back.
And what age would you be at that point?
I think I was about 13.
My goodness. It's almost as if you have been walking in more than one world, more than one dimension, maybe many dimensions, and that you've got the attention of a whole raft of people who tell you and trail you, right, and sort of interact with you in this 3D world whilst operating in these other dimensions. I mean, as we all do, but kind of in a different material way. It's strange.
Yeah, very strange. But although a friend of mine, I finally found out I was very close to in high school, she was an abductee, and she also was kidnapped by the same guys. But it was because I was walking with her, and it popped in my mind to talk to her, these weird guys who would abduct me, and they drove by exactly when I brought them up, and they saw me and pulled over. So that's how then she met them, and that's a story. If we get into it, it's going to be too long. But she wound up being abducted separately by one of them and told me later.
Okay, so before we get onto those, because that's quite a long story. Tell us about
they're real involved, and they were definitely into the occult too.
Yeah,
they did have a pentagram on their floor that they covered with a rug, and they were definitely into the occult. But anyway, you wanted me to talk about...
Yeah, you mentioned, you spoke some while ago about the blue monk.
Okay. I had a very strange dream. This would be, my daughter would be about 13. She's 26, so about 13 years ago. 13 years ago, I had a dream, and when I have like a prophetic dream, or I can do like I do out of body, I can fly. I have really, I have really good dreams, lucid dreams, psychic dreams, premonition, and I know when I have them that they're not normal dreams. And this one was very impressive on me, and I knew it meant something, so I wrote it all down. I even kept it on my computer. And in the dream, I'm walking in a place that's tropical, and some monks come up to me and they said, "Can you help us?" And I said, "Sure." And they were wearing orange robes, and I said, "What do you need?" And they said, "Well, you're going to have to come to our temple, but bring a girl with you." And they went away. And then I said, "Gee, now I'm lucidly dreaming, and I'm thinking to myself, what will I tell the girl? Because they didn't say what we're going to do. So how will I induce a girl to go to the temple with me? And what temple? How am I going to find it? Like all this is going on in my mind. And then I meet this girl, and she comes up to me and she said, "I'm supposed to help you," or something, and so she joins me. So I'm like, "Oh, well, that solves that problem. Here's the girl," And then she knew where the temple was, so we go to the temple. And it's this huge, huge temple. It's the biggest temple I've ever seen. It was wonderful. And we go inside, and it's real dark, but it was all candles, so you could see, but it was very dark. And it was like pyramidal inside, and it would be like pyramidal bleachers, or like a pyramid inside a pyramid. So the monks inside were on each layer, so each step of the pyramid going up. So there was like 1,000 monks maybe, on this pyramid inside this temple that was shaped sort of like a pyramid in a way. So it was very strange. And the monks, when we came in, were the ones that I met in the beginning, met us at the door, and they said, "You came, and here's what you have to do." And they had these buckets of this beautiful, beautiful cobalt blue paint. It was the most gorgeous color blue that's like the healing Buddha or Krishna, that color.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Wow." Like, wow, the paint, in my mind, and the dream too. And then they had these big brushes that were like cosmetic brushes, but gigantic, and these buckets. So they said, "You're going to paint the monks." And I said, "What? Like a painting of the monks?" And they said, "No, you have to paint their skin." So I said, "Okay," so we just do it. And we take the buckets and we go and we start to paint the monks. And anywhere their skin showed out of their robes, like their arms, their lower arm, their hands, their palms, their faces, their necks, their feet, their lower legs, we had to paint. And we did this. And when we were done, I said, "Why are we doing this, or what is this for?" And they said, "There's going to be a war." And then I understood immediately in the dream that these men were in spirit, and they weren't fully dimensional, and somehow the paint gave them dimensional quality or ability to interact on this dimension. Like,
That's interesting.
yeah. And like because we put the paint on them, that enabled them to then become dimensional and interact on this plane. And they said that it was going to be a huge spiritual war, and that we did our part to help them. And I was very happy about the dream. It was a great dream, because it was like, wow, like some good people are going to come and help the friggin' screwed up planet, if it comes true. And I would hope and I never have any, like I think I'm God complex or anything like that. I just think I'm weird, and I don't tell anybody, all this stuff, because they'll think I'm insane. But what happened later was, Well, that's another person that I wish we had a show. I could just talk about the guy I dated, Gustavo from Mexico, who was an Indian in Mexico, who was actually, I guess you would call, sort of a shaman, because we have our stupid words for things, and I don't know what he would call it in his Indian language. But he was trained from their traditional. He was an Indian. He wasn't mixed Spanish or any blood, except a great grandfather was Italian. Very nice looking man. And he had amazing, amazing psychic powers, abilities, and I actually dreamed of him when I was young, and I knew I was going to meet him when I was about 10 years old. I used to dream about him all the time. I knew what he looked like. I knew I was going to know him. And when I did meet him, I knew right away who he was, and I knew that that was the guy I had dreamed about when I was a kid. But I was with him, and I took him to the University of Pennsylvania Museum in Philadelphia, which is a very waspy old institution that would be almost on par with the Smithsonian, like second the Smithsonian for anything to do with cover-up and archaeology.
Okay.
And they did the same stuff, and they grave robbed everything, and it's called acquired. They put the nice word, acquired, So I said to Gustavo, would you like to see some of your ancestors who were acquired by some nice English gents, that came here to America and dug them up? And one of them, their head is in a glass case, and his teeth are filled with gold and beautiful pieces of turquoise and gems. And he said, oh yes, let's go. So we go to the museum, and I'm showing him these things. And then I wanted to show him, they have the largest natural crystal ball in the world there. And it was stolen at one point, actually, and they recovered it too. And it's in a room that's a rotunda, a round room, and it's in the center, and it's on a pedestal, and I would say it's maybe about 4 feet in diameter, and it's this beautiful quartz. It's like there are no imperfections, like no bubbles, no cracks, How could they find a piece of quartz that frigging big and then polish it so perfectly round and smooth? And this thing is really old. I don't even know if they knew how old it was, but it was there. So I wanted to show him that. When we came into that room, they had other Asian things all around that rotunda, around the walls, but that was in the middle. Instead, that was gone, and instead they had a platform, and they had rope around it so that bystanders couldn't get too close to interrupt them. And they had 2 monks sitting on boards over a giant sand box. And they were making a sand mandala. I didn't even know about that. I know the Indians had done that, but I didn't know anything about Tibetans, and I wasn't into that stuff and New Age, other people's religion thing. Plus, I didn't know there were Bon monks, and that the Bons, some are still Bon, and the others mix Buddhism and Bon together. Most of them now do that. But some are strictly Bon, which is the original shamanistic religion of Tibet. But these monks, anyway, were sitting there and doing this mandala, and we didn't bother them, and we just walked past them, and I was pissed because I wanted to show him this giant crystal, and it wasn't there. So we started to go look around the walls at things instead, and a reporter came in, and he was really rude and loud, and they had a younger monk standing there to speak to people who wanted to know something or ask questions. And he said real loud to the monk, can I talk to these guys? Can I interview them? Can blah, blah, blah. And he said, first of all, lower your voice. They're concentrating. If they make one mistake, they'll destroy the entire mandala. They are in a very deep trance, and they're concentrating, and you cannot interact with them, and you have to keep your voices low. So the guy was like a real jerk, So then he got real PO'd, so he walks away like, well, the hell with that. But he didn't leave, and he stood there and he just watched. And then the monk came over to me and and Gustavo, and he said, "Excuse me," and we said yes. And he was a young guy, and he said, "The monks want to speak to you." And I thought it was very strange right away, and I turned and I looked, and they were staring at us, and I thought, well, I thought they were supposed to be concentrating on the mandala, and they were in a trance, and they don't speak to people, and, the whole thing didn't make sense. But anyway, I was like, well, I'm very, cordial and nice, and I'm polite and nice to people, and I said, sure. So we walk over, and Gustavo was fine with it. And we walk over, and they didn't speak English, so he interpreted, the younger guy. And right away, they wanted to know where we were born, what time, and, the place, the date, and they're into that. So we told them, and then they said to tell us that they knew us, that we are very old, and we had ascended a long time ago, and we had volunteered to come back in this life, and that we would come back one more time. We would return in one more incarnation, and that they knew us. So,
and were they actually from the area of Tibet, or did you know?
Yes, they were from Tibet.
Okay.
They weren't from. They were some of the few that were actually allowed to stay in Tibet, and they were Bon, I guess. I don't know. I didn't ask. I didn't know about that then. But yeah. Gustavo was all like, "Yeah, I know all about that," And I was like, "What do you mean you know all about that?" But I already knew, like, Gustavo was like way out there with this shamanistic stuff. I mean, he could be standing next to you, and the next minute he would be up in a tree. He could wake me up. He could get in a dream and talk to me in a dream and tell me to go and get on the phone, and then wake me up, and I could be talking to him on the phone. He could do anything. This guy was amazing. My daughter loved him. But, I mean, he acted like he knew all about it, and it wasn't any news to him, but to me it was. But, I was like, wow, that's really strange, but cool, Did
it make sense to you? Did any of that resonate? About, you descended already, and then you were coming back for one last incarnation, and...
Yeah, well, yeah, no. Like, I thought, well, that's really cool if it's true. And I believe in reincarnation, but and I said, well, I don't know that much about them, and I said, well, if they're like the regular Tibetan ones, at that point in America already, it was like the yuppies were really into the New Agers, and my boss was like that, and they're really selfish, greedy, materialistic people. Religion of the Month Club, really not into the religion. Like, they like karma, but they don't know what dharma is, like that kind of stuff. That and I'm not into, like, I don't want to practice other people's religion. If I meet someone and they want to share it with me, it's a different story or something. But so I didn't know anything about that stuff, but I just thought it was interesting, and I thought that would be really cool.
And again, did you have anything else to do? Any other interaction with those particular monks?
No.
That was
we
it.
just left
Okay.
after that. But then I had the blue monk dream after that one. That was
okay.
So that was years later, because that would have been, my daughter was like maybe 1 or 2, and she was 13 when I had the blue monk dream. And when I had the blue monk dream, I had forgotten practically about the monks there. Plus, I didn't even put it together. It still didn't connect really.
Yeah.
So it didn't, And then about 2 years later, a friend of mine had a party, and a friend of hers who is a Santera, and she's psychic, she was trained by her grandmothers, was at the party, saw me. She's a wonderful, gifted artist too. And
what is a Santara? I'm not familiar.
it's Puerto Rican. It's from Yoruba, comes from Africa, and it's practiced
Okay.
in all the different islands. And in
Okay.
Jamaica, where also I was called to Jamaica by people who practice the same religion, and it all comes from Yoruba in Africa. Is was the original name of the religion, but
Okay.
as they, were taken as slaves and then mix and, and then mix in, they actually mix in Catholic, um,
Yeah.
saints, like they'll use the Virgin Mary will be also mixed with because they want to convert them to Catholicism. So they play along with the game, but they see the similarity in that Mary is the female element and they have the female goddess they channel that one of them will channel. And that's how they do it. They channel certain ones. Only certain ones who are gifted can channel a certain god, and they have certain ones. So and they sound similar. So in Puerto Rico, it'll be, Shango, and then it's Chango in Jamaica or something. So it's
Yeah.
very similar.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they're completely aware unless they study that they do this. But
Okay.
it all comes from one root thing.
Okay. Listen, Donadela, we're just moving on in time.
Well,
I'm
anyway,
really
she
motoring.
wanted me to meet her because she said she knew I was psychic and she knew I had all these poltergeist things and this stuff. She knew all about me. So she told me to come to her house. I came to her house and she knew all about my life. But another day she called me and said, I have somebody here I want you to meet. And she picked me up and brought me over, and it was another monk. And he was a Bon monk. And he did my birth date again and where I was born and again. And then he said, you are a very ancient spirit. You ascended a long time ago. You do not have to reincarnate anymore. You voluntarily reincarnated. He told me again this, and then he said, you'll reincarnate one more time. And he said, you will be a llama when you reincarnate the next time. And at first I thought he meant an animal. And then I realized, and I said, not like the Dalai Lama. And he says, no, not the Dalai Lama, but a llama. And he said, it's a lamassari. Like, it's like you're under the llama, but you're the head of a lamassari. But he said, you'll be a llama, though. And I was like, wow, And he said, now I want you to tell me one dream and only one dream. So I told him the blue monk dream, and I felt embarrassed. And he totally understood it. He said, he said, that's exactly right. That's what's happening, and that is why you're coming. And he said, and look at this. And he pulled his orange robe aside, and underneath they wear cobalt blue, the same color as the paint. Like they have like a little shirt thing they wear underneath.
And did
I
he
was
say
like,
that had a specific meaning?
Hmm?
Did he say that color had a specific meaning?
No, no, it was like he just wanted me to see the blue was the same
Okay.
blue or something. Like
Yeah.
I was not. It's just I can't explain. It's just so everything is always so strange. Like my
Yeah,
brain
it
pops.
is.
It's like the guy's like going to open his robe, and why is he open his robe? And then you see the blue, and it's like it's the blue, and that's what I said. That's the blue, And then he laughs, and he's like so child. They're always like childish. They're so innocent and sweet, and he says no. He says no. You're in this. You're going to be in this. This is why you're here. And he said,
So that you were there, what, to understand that you were coming back or to
right,
develop certain
and that
skills?
my next incarnation will be it's a spiritual war, really. In the end, it is a spiritual war. I mean, it's not necessarily in the Bible, the way they wrote it. And it's weird because there's this weird technology shit involved that you can't imagine. But actually, a lot of that's acquired through alchemy or black magic too.
Yeah.
So it's
Donadela, I wanted
technology,
to
but it is.
just talk a little bit about some of the physical impact that your energy field has on things around you electrically, and also this experience you had of a blue, I can't remember, it was a blue beam that was actually emanated from you.
Yes. Oh yeah, and another
Tell us
one
about
too.
that, because it's just, there's so many
Yeah.
elements to your life that are just
Um,
plain
I
bizarre.
don't know, maybe if it's like post-abduction does it or what, but sometimes I will blow out consecutively every light bulb or switch that I touch to a light, every one as I go through until I do 5, and sometimes it'll be so bad the bulb will actually explode, like the glass will explode, when I turn the light on.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes, like if I get near metal, a blue bolt will shoot out of my finger and ground to the metal, and it hurts. It's really bad, the shock. But my daughter actually saw it one time because I was going to make breakfast, and it was an electric stove, but I had a metal frying pan, and I was going to make eggs or pancakes or something, and I didn't even touch it yet, and my finger was at least a foot above, and this blue beam shot out of my finger like I was Wonder Woman or something, boom, and she saw it too, and it hurt like hell, and I yelled, ow, and she said, wow, how did you do that,
And
and
so, I mean, was there anything else that precipitated that, this
no,
blue
no, it's
electrical?
just, and also I can't wear watches. Any kind, mechanical, battery, they go
Hmm.
backwards, forwards, stop. That's the only other thing that's strange about me, that I don't know if that's, thing that's common, but
It is fairly common, actually, with yeah, experiences. Yeah, it is. It is.
I mean, I've never heard of it. That's one of the strange things. I mean, I have so many that it could just go on forever. And poltergeist activity, that is just never ending. And, but at one point it was so bad that I had to have monks come and help me get rid of them, and psychics and all kind of people. But, I mean, I've seen so many things that physics just, nothing is solid. First of all, I understand that now.
Yeah.
It's just all particles, and they resonate, and there's a frequency that keeps them together, and there's a way you can change the frequency, and then they're not together anymore. That's how you can make all of my silverware come through my ceiling. Like I could see this happening in my house. And that went on for 2 years without stopping. And
You mean things coming through, solid objects going through other solid objects? Is that
oh
what you mean?
yes, and also my cats, that upset me very, very, very much, very, very much.
Well, what was that incident?
I was sitting on my couch and I was reading, and the 3 cats were there, and one was sitting on the back of the couch, and the other 2 were laying one on either side of me. And next minute, there were no cats. And I heard them meowing like they were petrified and they were somewhere trapped. And I'm going, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? And I'm like listening for where they are. And I found them, and they were between the back door and the storm door. And our door was solid oak. And where I was sitting on the couch in the living room, you could see straight through to the kitchen to the door. I was actually facing that door. And I didn't see any cats go flying anywhere. They just disappeared. And then suddenly they were somehow shut between those 2 doors. And I mean, if you opened them and tried to throw them in, they would keep jumping out anyway, like you couldn't do it, I don't think. But they were all 3 jammed in there. It was horrible. And I thought, that's horrific. You just put animals through a solid object, like, what if you killed them? Like, I got so upset about that. And it would also dress them up horrifically, and in the most horrific looking things like death shrouds over their heads. Or
do you mean they'd suddenly appear with that?
yes, or it would be like a blur in front of your face over the cat, and you'd see like this blurring motion, and then the cat would have this like somebody's pantyhose on its head, but it was wrapped around and around and around and around and around and around, and then under its neck, but it would be all smooth, and its head was just covered solid. And it was real tight on its neck too, and you'd have to get it off quick because it would strangle the poor cat. But it would look like it was like a death shroud or something. It was like,
And again, did anything happen to kickstart all of that kind of horrible activity off?
that was the triangular black UFO that showed up over my house.
Okay, so we haven't mentioned that. So where are we in time with the black triangle? Was that recent or
no?
Was that quite a long time ago?
That was, my daughter was maybe about 6 or 7.
Well, we're just coming to the end of the show, Donadela. So I told you it would go fast. So let's hear that story, and then we'll just wrap it up with that. But it's been absolutely fascinating. Gosh.
Yeah, well, I was looking out the window. Well, I had black helicopter problems too. We can talk about that another day. I have all kind of problems. Now I get abducted by helicopters, I believe. But I don't think they're helicopters. Anyway, this was a night that there was supposed to be a comet or some other type of event. And I set an alarm clock, and I got up at like 3 in the morning and stood on my windowsill, opened the top window, it was summer, and actually put my upper body out because there were trees so I could see better and see on the horizon in the right direction wherever this event would be, a comet, or you could see a planet really well, or there was an eclipse, I forget what it was. And I'm standing there waiting and looking, and all of a sudden I felt like I had a duck, like something was going to hit me in the head. And I looked up, and there's this craft, this big black triangular craft just sitting there. And it was silent. And yet, you know what? I didn't tell you that. And it actually, I felt like it was sentient itself. Not that it was alive. Either it was someone was controlling it, but it was sentient, and it could interact with me. The craft itself could sense me. It was sentient, the craft, somehow, even though it was living. I couldn't explain the feeling.
Yeah, I've heard of that before too, Donadela.
I don't know how to explain that. And it did have lights, but I don't know if they moved or it was different lights going on and off. And I think they were white and blue and either red, I don't remember, or orange. I can't remember the colors or anything. And I didn't even write it down. I wasn't into that stuff. I was like, I don't want to remember anymore. It scares me so much. Anyway, I stood there and stared and stared and stared, and I don't know how long I was there. I was like just frozen by it because it was there, and it just like froze me, And then the next thing I know, it started to move, but it was like it was gliding, like a glider. I mean, it didn't make a sound. It just silently and slowly just glided. And it was only about 20 feet above because the tree across the street from me was that tall, and it just touched like the top branches and brushed them a little bit, and you could hear the leaves rattling and see it touch a little bit, And then I kept watching it, and it slowly went off as far as I could see towards the horizon, and then it stopped. It made a right turn, and it took off at light speed. And I ran to the other window because my house was on a really high hill, and you could see Center City from my house, the tall skyscrapers at night, the lights you could see from my house. And I was at least 10 miles from Center City, and it was already over Center City when I got to the other window.
Amazing stuff. Well, Donadela, we have to wrap this show up now, and I just want to say thank you very much. And
that was then the poltergeist started, and
yeah,
also
from
then the black helicopters started coming.
Okay. Well, listen, Donadela, that's for another show because we've been just about 2 hours.
And the Men in Black. We had the Men in Black. But they were really weird Men in Black.
I know. Hey, well, listen, Donna, we've run out of airtime, so we are going to have that on another occasion. And I just want to say thank you very much for Moan Goody connection, and that music was amazing. I think what a talented person. I'm going to listen to more of that and maybe contact him with a view to using it in a mash somewhere up and down the Dale. So thank you, Donadela. We'll speak again, and I just want to say, thank you for hanging in there with me. I know it's been, quite difficult for you this evening. So thank you, Vin. Thanks everyone for listening.
I just want to do it now. Before I would never want to talk about it, but I'm, I think they keep reinfecting me, and I'm in a lot of pain, and I don't care anymore, and I don't even have most people. The few people that left, I know, I don't even care, and they're the type of people who wouldn't be upset about it anyway.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm going to have to close the airwaves and speak to you offline. So, Vin, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody who was listening, wherever you were. This is another Ammach Files. And it's the 2nd of June. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
All right. Good night, Donadela. Thanks, Finn. And we're out.
You have been listening to the Ammach Files. The Ammach website is www.ammach.co.uk or www.alienabductionuk.com. The email address is ammach@hotmail.co.uk. And the Ammach mobile helpline number is 0795 1752813. The YouTube channels are the Ammach Project and Ammach UK. The Twitter name is also Ammach UK. Thanks for listening. And if you have enjoyed or found helpful the Ammach presentations so far, please consider supporting this important project and resource by donating what you can. And once again, thanks for listening.